All right, today's Math is Everywhere topic of the day for Unit 3 is rational versus irrational numbers. Today we're going to talk about what the difference is between a rational number and an irrational number and how you can tell whether a certain number might be rational or irrational. How are there irrational numbers? What are irrational numbers and how are they different from rational numbers? Those are all the kinds of things we're going to talk about today. So let's start with a little review. Rational numbers. A rational number is any number that can be written as a fraction or a ratio. Some examples: 2/3, -1/111th, 7 because it can be written as 7/1, -17, and 0.25 because 0.25 can be written as a fraction, 1/4. All right, the square root of 64. Is that a rational number or an irrational number? Well, the square root of 64 is 8, and 8 is a rational number because you can write it as 8/1. What about the square root of 4? That's rational as well because it's 2. All whole numbers are rational because you can always write them as 2/1 or 8/1. What about a number like 81? If you take the square root of 81, rational or irrational? Rational again. This leaves the question, what is irrational? Is anything irrational? Well, here's another example. If you had the square root of 36, that would come out to 6 because 6 times 6 makes 36. 6 is a perfectly rational number, so the square root of 36 comes out rational. But if you had the square root of 37 instead of the square root of 36, nothing times itself makes 37. 37 isn't a nice square of a number. So the only way you can find the square root of 37 is to use the square root button on a calculator. If you do that, you get some kind of crazy long decimal that probably takes up the whole screen of your calculator. And it's a bunch of numbers that just kind of go on and on and on. And this isn't like one of those nice repeating decimals like 333333333, or even one that has a pattern like 1717171717. This is just a string of digits that has no pattern, and that right there is what we call an irrational number. An irrational number happens when you try to take the square root of something that isn't a square of something. And you can tell what irrational numbers look like because irrational numbers have decimals that keep on going forever and ever and ever, but they go on forever without a repeating pattern. There's no set pattern of numbers that keeps on going. Okay, so an irrational number is any number that cannot be written as a fraction because of that crazy decimal stuff. Some examples are the square root of 2, or the square root of 3, or the square root of 5, or the square root of 17. Those are all irrational numbers because 2 isn't the square of anything, and 3 isn't the square of anything, and 5 and 17 aren't squares of anything, so you can't square root them nicely. So those numbers turn out irrational. Okay, so here's just a little bit more of an example. The square root of 121 is 11 because 11 times 11 is 121. That's a nice rational number. But the square root of 2, well, if you punch it into your calculator, you get something like that. That's irrational. There's no pattern to it, okay? And again, irrational numbers keep on going without a pattern. So let's check. The square root of 4 is 2. Is that rational or irrational? That's rational. The square root of 4/9. Well, the square root of 4 is 2 and the square root of 9 is 3, so that could be like 2/3. That's perfectly rational. It's a ratio. It's a fraction. It's a rational number. But the square root of 7, yuck. That just comes out to some weird decimal. We don't know what it is, but we definitely know that it is an irrational number. And there is your lesson. Rational numbers can be written as ratios. Irrational numbers can't because they're crazy, crazy decimals that go on and on and on forever without any pattern, and they're kind of yucky. So Here's your practice problems for this lesson. Number 1, make up an example of a rational number. Any example. You make one up. Practice problem 2, make up an example of an irrational number. Any irrational number that you can think of to show that you understand what an irrational number is. Go ahead, now. Go ahead, make up an example. All right. Once you have that done, you're done. Thanks a lot.